What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some of my favorite and least favorite things about the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 to help you decide whether or not it's the right phone for you. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So my first pro for the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 is the camera quality. Now, to give you a quick rundown of the camera setup here, up front, we got a real nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 16 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as features go, it is pretty good here. But again, the best thing about the camera setup is definitely the photo quality. Sure, compared to something like a Moto G Stylus or any other kind of mid-range phone, the photo quality of this phone is not going to be nearly as good. But for more of an entry-level phone compared to other phones like it, I do think what we're getting here is actually pretty impressive. To give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the main camera. And really, despite having only a 16 megapixel camera and being more of an entry-level phone, again, I do think things look really nice. And for the average user, if you're taking pictures for more casual purposes, like maybe a couple Instagram posts every now and then like stuff for your own memories, or maybe something like Snapchat where the quality doesn't even matter, for that kind of use, I definitely think this camera will get the job done. And again, compared to other phones like it, I do think it is one of the better options. My second pro for the Moto G Play is the display. With this phone, we're getting a decently large 6.5-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So for what it is, obviously compared to a much more expensive phone, it's not quite as good, and honestly, even for this price range, it's not really anything out of the ordinary. But that being said, at 6.5 inches, it is decently large, so if you're going to be on your phone a good amount doing stuff like web browsing, social media, maybe reading, no matter what you're doing, despite not being like a giant display or anything, it is definitely still large enough to give you a good experience. And with a 20:9 aspect ratio, we are getting a pretty tall and narrow form factor, so if you're doing something like reading, browsing the web, using social media, with a form factor like this, you can fit a decent amount on the screen without having to scroll too much. And then if you're doing something in landscape mode like watching a video, looking at photos, things like that, you're gonna get a nice immersive experience, and in general, things are gonna look pretty good. And when it comes to the image quality, sure, on one hand, we're not getting a 1080p resolution, unfortunately, but I will say, even with only a 720p resolution, on this phone, things do look pretty nice, and aside from being decently sharp, the colors and brightness are really good too. Now, that being said, if you're outside in the sun or in a super bright area with only an IPS LCD display, things might not be the easiest to see, but in a normal kind of indoor setting, the viewing angles are decent, the colors are pretty bold and vibrant, and overall the brightness is pretty good. In this price range, a lot of the phones have really dim displays even at full brightness, but we're really not getting that here. Again, I feel like for most people, the image is definitely going to look good enough to get the job done. And in addition to this, with a 90Hz refresh rate, the movement on the screen is going to be a little bit faster and smoother, and while this is definitely not like a groundbreaking feature or anything, it will make the phone feel a bit more premium to use, so definitely not a bad thing either. My third pro for the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 is the headphone jack. Now, this might sound a little odd, but keep in mind nowadays, more and more manufacturers are starting to get rid of headphone jacks, even in their more affordable phones, like Samsung got rid of them in a lot of the A-series phones, and even Blue, which is more of a lesser known brand. But luckily with the Moto G Play, we actually do still have a headphone jack, and while I think at this point at least, most entry-level phones like this still do have them, it's definitely one of those features that we're really going to have to enjoy while we can, because at this point it's really only a matter of time before entry-level phones don't have them either. So if you do typically like to use a normal pair of wired headphones, then just keep in mind with this phone, since it does have a headphone jack, you're not going to be forced to use an adapter or wireless headphones. My fourth pro for the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 is the battery. Now with this phone, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 10-watt fast charging, so definitely a real good battery here. Now the charging speeds are honestly pretty mediocre, but for phones in this price range, really, you can't really expect too much. And in my experience, despite not charging super fast, it is at least decent, especially considering the battery is pretty large. That being said though, aside from the charging speeds, of course, with a 5000 mAh battery, you can definitely expect to get some real good battery life here. So if you're in a situation where maybe you don't even get a chance to charge your phone during the day, but you still need to use your phone all day, in that kind of situation, a phone like the Moto G Play 2023 that has such a large battery is definitely going to be a great choice. And in addition to the life per charge, having a large battery is definitely great for longevity down the road, because as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, with a larger battery like this, it's not really going to affect you nearly as quickly as it would with, say, a 3000 mAh battery. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a longer time, then this phone is also going to be a great choice for that. And finally, my fifth pro for the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 is the design and build quality. Now, first of all, with the design, although the bottom bezel and sort of the top bezel could be thinner, the rest of it does look really nice. I mean, the side bezels are pretty thin, and again, I really like the hole punch front-facing camera. Unlike a water drop notch, it really doesn't cut into the display too much. So if you're trying to watch a video in landscape mode, for example, not having a big notch here is definitely going to make things a bit more immersive. In addition to this, while definitely not really really looking unique or premium or anything. I do like the back. It's made of sort of a matte material that doesn't show fingerprints too much. So yeah, in general, considering this is more of an entry-level phone compared to most phones in this price range, I do think it does look really nice. And aside from the design, the materials are also really good. Sure, the phone is made entirely of plastic except the display, like pretty much every phone in this price range, or really any phone that's not a flagship phone for that matter. But despite this, the plastic is good quality. It feels pretty solid. The buttons also feel good, so the phone doesn't seem like it's gonna fall apart or anything. And it does have a surprisingly good amount of weight to it. Sure, it's not like super heavy like a more premium phone would be. But again, considering this is a really entry-level phone compared to something like some of the cheaper TCL phones, for example, and even some lower-end Samsungs for that matter, this phone does feel quite a bit more solid. So in general, if you're looking for a more entry-level phone and maybe not a really premium design per se, but you do want something that looks decently modern and has nice build quality and materials, then you're really not going to be disappointed with this phone. But now that we've gone over some of the good things about this phone, let's talk about some potential drawbacks. So my first con for the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 is the processor. Now with this phone, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G37 processor. Overall, for the performance, it's not terrible. I have actually seen quite a bit worse. But in general, if you're doing anything other than more light use and more basic activities like web browsing, taking pictures, maybe some really light social media, although on something like Instagram, for example, it honestly might lag a little bit since platforms like that tend to have a bit more animation. But overall, again, for more casual use like that, this phone will at least get the job done. But keep in mind, if you're going to be on your phone a lot, especially doing more demanding activities, you will notice it is definitely on the slower side. And even compared to other entry-level phones, something like the Samsung Galaxy A04s, which granted isn't even in the US yet, but still that phone is quite a bit faster, things like the TCL 30XL. My point is there are plenty of phones in this price range that are quite a bit faster than this phone. So even if you are looking for a really affordable entry-level phone, if you're using your phone a bit more and performance is really more of an important factor for you, then just keep in mind, you can definitely do better. Now I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 5. And here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these. And that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance-wise. I imagine for most people it's probably not going to be really an upgrade per se. But if you are in a situation where you have a phone that has similar performance and you're really just kind of trying to make a more lateral move, then this is at least a good way to make sure this phone isn't too much of a downgrade. But again, in general, if you are doing more of the bare minimum and you're not really going to be on your phone a ton, then I do think it will at least get the job done. But if you care at all about performance, then I would definitely consider going with something else. My second con for the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 is that there's no ultra-wide camera. Now considering this phone does actually have a really good regular camera for what it is, this is really too bad. Because if you are taking a lot of pictures and you want to get those wider angle photos or you just want a wider variety of features in general, having an ultra-wide camera is definitely really useful. And at this point in 2023, an ultra-wide camera is such a common basic feature that I feel like every phone should have one. I've seen $100 phones that have one, and granted this is still an entry-level device too, but in general, again, I feel like at this point, there's really no reason not to have an ultra-wide camera. So overall, just keep in mind that if you are taking a lot of pictures, while this phone does have a really good main camera and at least a macro camera too, if you are looking for a phone that has an ultra-wide camera, you will be disappointed here because again, this phone does not have one. My third con for the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 is the storage. Now this is a big one because with this phone, we're only getting 32GB of internal storage. Now granted, there is micro SD card expansion, so I guess it's not too bad, but even then, in 2023, 32GB is really just not a lot. And if you're planning to have any decent amount of apps on this phone, then keep in mind, it will fill up pretty quickly. Right now, this is pretty much everything I have on this phone, and honestly, this is really not a lot. I just got a couple social media apps, streaming platforms, search type things, and then a couple games, and that's really about it. But despite this, as you can see here, that basic amount of stuff is actually taking up almost all of my storage. And I'm really not the biggest power user out there. I don't really do a ton on my phone. So just keep in mind, if you are more of a heavy user and you're constantly downloading stuff like apps, games, things like that, you will most likely be disappointed here because again, in 2023, 32GB is really not a lot of space, and it is going to fill up pretty quickly. My fourth con for the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 is the software. Now this phone does currently have Android 12, and while I'm pretty sure it's at least going to get Android 13 at some point, it is kind of disappointing that it doesn't currently have Android 13, considering pretty much every Samsung Galaxy A series phone, for example, does have it. And again, this is 2023, we're on Android 13. I mean, this phone literally has 2023 in the name. So you would think being a quote-unquote newer phone, it would at least have the latest version of Android. But unfortunately, it does only have Android 12, which pretty much every entry-level phone I've seen at this point so far, besides Samsung phones at least, still only has Android 12. I don't really know what's up with that. So in general, I guess it's not too big of a drawback, but still, considering this is such a new phone, it really would have been nice to see the latest version of Android. So if you are more concerned about the software, I would definitely go with like probably a Samsung. But on the other hand, if you're not too concerned about it, then just keep in mind, judging by what happened with the Moto GP, which is pretty similar to this this phone. I'm guessing we will at least get Android 13 eventually. So again, if you're not too concerned about having it right this second, then this most likely won't be that big a deal. And finally, my fifth con for the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 is that it doesn't have NFC. Now, in case you don't know what it is, NFC is the technology behind contactless mobile payment services. So if you like to use tap and pay, you will need NFC to do that. But unfortunately, with the Moto G Play, this phone does not have NFC, which on one hand, I'm not really that surprised considering there are other phones like the Motorola Moto G 5G and the Moto G Stylus 4G that don't have NFC, and those phones are a lot more expensive than this one. But considering, first of all, this phone is a bit newer than those ones, and second of all, at this point in 2023, we're seeing $100 Cricket branded phones that have NFC, so I really feel like it should be a standard now. So in general, while I'm not really that surprised this phone doesn't have NFC, just considering Motorola doesn't typically put it on their lower end devices for whatever reason, it is still kind of disappointing, and if you do like to use tap and pay, definitely keep in mind that again, this phone does not have it. But those were my pros and cons for the Motorola Moto G Play 2023. In general, despite some drawbacks, which are mostly more on the minor side depending on what's important to you, if you are looking for a really affordable entry-level phone for more basic activities, I do think the Moto G Play 2023 is definitely at least worth considering. Now, once again, if you want to learn more about it, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.